I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 69 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. For the first hour, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, March 9, 2023, the committee is resuming its study of the national monuments to Canada's mission in Afghanistan. La réunion aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme hybride.
Today's meeting is in hybrid format in accordance with the standing orders. Members can take part in person or over Zoom. Even though this room has a high-performance audio system, there may be feedback. That feedback can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause them serious injury. I would therefore ask all witnesses and all committee members to make sure that your earpiece is never too close to your microphone, because that leads to feedback that can be extremely harmful to interpreters. So we will be very careful. I would also remind everyone that all comments should be addressed to the chair. In accordance with our routine motion on connection tests, all connection tests have been performed before this meeting. I would therefore like to welcome our witnesses very warmly with us as individuals. We have François Lemoine, a lawyer, Francine Laure, public art consultant, and from the Canada Research Chair in Architecture Competitions and Mediations of Excellence, we have Jean-Pierre Chupin, professor at the Université de Montréal, appearing on video conference. Welcome. And from Team Daou, we have principal partner René Daou, architect and urban planner, and Lucas Fortin, an artist and architect. We will now move to the first round of questions. But before we do that, I would like to welcome all members who are here with us today. Mr. Boulris is replacing Ms. Rachel Blaney. Welcome. Mr. Paulus is replacing Mr. Tolmy. The way in which we do this, here you see the sign that I hold up when you have 1 minute left, and the red card means that you are out of time. We will, before questions, have some opening statements. We can begin with Team Daou. There are two of you, but you will be sharing the time, the 5 minutes. Hello, everyone. I'm René Daou, architect and urban planner in charge of the Daou team. We are made up of Daou Lestage Lizotte Stecker architects, Lucas Fortin and Louise Arbour. The winning team in the competition for the monument to commemorate Canada's mission in Afghanistan. That was the winner selected by the jury, the only decision that should prevail here. Thank you for this opportunity to make our voices heard, to condemn the exceptional lack of ethics associated with how this internationally renowned competition was organized. In a 35-year career, we've never had to face anything like this. Today, I'd like to talk to you about an undemocratic and unfair process. The process is unfair to the veterans, to civil society, to all who took part in Canada's mission in Afghanistan. It's ironic that you're linking all those who worked so hard to defend and establish democracy in Afghanistan with the most anti-democratic process in the history of Canadian competitions. This process dishonors the veterans, whom you are exploiting for your own benefit by associating them with a pseudo-survey governed by opaque rules. One of their principal values is integrity. The process was also unfair to the jury. 4 of the 7 members were associated with the Canadian mission and its history, the mission in Afghanistan, of course. The voice of experts was heard, articulated by a veteran, a National Memorial Cross mother, also a former Canadian ambassador to Afghanistan and a historian. The jury was very thorough. They consulted technical reports. They confirmed a winning team, and in not following their recommendations, you created a major breach of contract and wasted public funds. This is a dangerous precedent for public art and architecture in Canada in future, and for how calls of tender are managed within the government. We are also very puzzled by the fact that the Departments of Heritage and Veterans Affairs, as well as the National Capital Commission, endorsed this iniquitous and unfair process. Is it really this kind of ethically tainted cultural legacy that we want to promote today, nationally and internationally? Chairman, out of respect for the memory of veterans on November 11th, the government should make amends, play by its own rules, and uphold the democratic process, which is so fundamental to the history of competitions in Canada. My name is Lucas Fortin. I'm here as a proud member of the DAO team, but also as the voice of generations to come, as well as that of an entire community in culture and creativity. We are concerned about the value placed by the government on our work, which is tomorrow's legacy, tomorrow's heritage. Contract documents are very clear about the role of Canadian heritage in this competition. The department is responsible for the design competition and overall management of this monument. Canadian heritage cannot delegate its responsibility and must enforce its own regulations. The survey was intended solely to provide food for thought for the jury. That's what it did. It was not intended to invalidate the jury's choice. On June 19th, just 2 hours before the official announcement of the winner, we were told that we had won the competition, but that the contract would be awarded to a different team. Since then, we have expressed and repeated how profoundly we disagree with this unfair and unreasonable decision. We have written 3 times and requested meetings with 2 ministers, but to no avail. On September 15th, we wrote to the Prime Minister of Canada asking his government to correct its mistake and act on the jury's decision. All we received was an acknowledgement of receipt. Given these facts and given the importance of the matter, we encouraged key players affected by this dangerous precedent to take action. So we are voicing the indignation of over 2,000 stakeholders associated directly and indirectly with public art, design and architecture competitions in this country. Academics across Canada are condemning your anti-democratic process. Artists have submitted a petition. Official letters have been sent to the ministers. Canadian heritage must assume full responsibility and comply with its own rules in order to honour the values promoted by Canada: respect for democracy, respect for people, integrity and excellence. While there is still time, the government must prevent the National Memorial to Canada's mission in Afghanistan from being forever tainted by one, if not the greatest controversy in the history of our country's competition. So, thank you both. I would now like to welcome Mr. Jean-Pierre Chupin, who is on video. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Yes, very well. My name is Jean-Pierre Chupin. I'm an academic architect and Canada Research Chair in Architecture, Competition and Mediation of Excellence at the Université de Montréal. I'm speaking independently on behalf of my own expert knowledge of competition jury practices. I've been documenting competitions in Canada for over 20 years. I founded the Canadian Competitions Catalogue, which comprises nearly 500 competitions in architecture, landscape and urban planning projects since Confederation. It's consulted by over 3,000 users a month worldwide. It's a bilingual library supported by the Canada Foundation for Innovation, as well as the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I have published reference works on competitions, served on advisory committees for museums and governments, and it is as an advisor to public service and Procurement Canada and to the parliamentary precinct that I would point out today how many competitions have been held for the design and construction of civic and government buildings, beginning with the Canadian Parliament in 1858, legislative buildings in Ontario in 1880s, British Columbia in 1892, Saskatchewan in 1907, and Manitoba in 1913. And, of course, the competition for the Canadian Vimy Memorial in 1921, which was one of the most symbolically important in Canada's history. So the government has called on me for the international competition for Block 2 on Parliament Hill. The building will house your offices for the next decade, and it was the best organized competition I've ever seen, with Canadians exceptionally well represented on a large composite jury. As an academic who's helping train future generations of professionals, I'm deeply concerned to see that democratic practices are being infringed by invalidating the jury's decision for the monument to Canada's mission in Afghanistan. All studies show that when it comes to judging the complexity of projects for public buildings and monuments, a popular vote is never as reliable, fair, and transparent as a well-organized competition. A competition jury is analogous to a court jury. It represents a wide range of public interests and is rigorous in its process. The jury for the memorial competition was made up of representatives well informed about the many issues at stake and debated every proposal for hours, finally coming to a well-reasoned consensus in the collective interest. I didn't observe the jury. In fact, very few people, in fact no one, have seen the jury's report. That in itself is a problem. But given that the government announced to the winners who had won, the jury obviously operated as it should. Now, if a government is going to invalidate a competition and replace the decision with a survey, no artist is going to wish to take part. Let's think about an analogy. What would happen if a court ruling in a criminal case were replaced by an online vote to find the guilty party? It would seem to be an outrageous public lynching as well as a denial of democratic institutions and mechanisms. I think I can attest to the concern of public procurement representatives with whom I work. They want to see what your decision will be, to see whether jury practices in the future will be compromised in public procurement contracts. The government has a duty to set an example and to honor its commitments. I believe I speak on behalf of future professionals as well, colleagues I see daily, a generation of young Canadians very sensitive to ethical issues and to social justice. How will we explain to them that a government can edict a judgment procedure or judging procedure that represents all interests and then flout its own rules, the rules that guarantee fairness? This is a turning point in the history of competitions in Canada. I appeal to your judgment as parliamentarians. It is important for the jury's report to be released as soon as possible, and the results of the competition need to be verified and conform to the jury's decision. For the third and last comments, I would invite Ms. Francine Lord and Mr. Fortin. My name is Francine Lord. I'm an art specialist, and for 26 years, I directed the Bureau d'Art Public de la Ville de Montréal. I'm now secretary of the Commission d'Art Public and a member of the Comité consultatif en reconnaissance de la Ville de Montréal, which is responsible for providing advice on commemoration projects. I'm speaking to you today in a personal capacity, and I do so with conviction that my experience can shed light on the process surrounding the competition in question. I have run more than 75 public art competitions, many of which were commemorative in nature. In the interests of fairness and to avoid arbitrary choices, the Ville de Montréal entrusted the selection of works to outside experts with recognized experience. At no time were the conclusions of juries for competitions ever questioned by authorities, who were quite aware that rules and processes applied were based on best practice. Unlike a work that is included in a museum collection, there are different issues involved when acquiring a work of public art. What added value does it bring to the urban landscape? How does it contribute to tomorrow's artistic heritage? Evaluating a commemorative public art project like this one is more complex. A number of additional considerations need to be taken into account by the jury, which pay particular attention to how the artist treats the weight of memory and the way in which the artist remains sensitive to the pain of the community concerned. But the jury also takes account of the time when the work becomes a part of history, since a monument is always the bearer of the values of its own time. Was any member of the public who took part in the survey able to judge all that from a 10-line text and a few images? Could they properly analyze all considerations that guided the jury in its choice? In conclusion, I would draw your attention to the consequences of the ministry's decision to go against the jury's recommendation. That decision will tarnish the government's credibility when it comes to public art. That will leave its mark. It undermines confidence in the governance of the country's highest institution, from which we should truly expect best practice. Mr. Chairman, committee members, I would like to thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. My name is François Lemoine. I'm a lawyer specializing in art and heritage law. I chair the International Literary and Artistic Association for Canada, teach art and cultural heritage law at the Université de Montréal, and I'm co-chair of Culture Montréal's Public Art Committee. I'm here in a personal capacity. I would like, in conjunction with the speeches given by Jean-Pierre Chupin and Francine Lord, to explain why the jury system is the best guarantee of quality for public art and how the government should have been bound by the rules it had set for itself. I have tabled the competition requirements. On page 10, the document specifies that, and I quote, it's the jury's responsibility to select the winning design based on the combined scores of the jury and the technical committee's evaluations. On page 2, it states that the contract will be awarded to the winning team. Under the competition rules, the government simply did not have the discretion to award the contract to a team that had not been selected. That decision was the jury's to make, not a minister's. If withdrawing from Afghanistan in the summer of 2021 changed things so much that the competition as designed was no longer appropriate, the only solution was to cancel it and to run another. The composition of the jury shows that all required forms of expertise were there. Veterans were consulted. The jury took the consultations into account, and that is why we did not organize a scientific survey, because this was an advisory body. The jury was representative. It had time to assess all factors that were pertinent, and its decision needs to be respected. Thank you, Mr. Laure, Mr. Lemoine. We will now go to the first round of questions. Each member will have 6 minutes. I would invite Mr. Pierre Paulus to take the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, everyone. At present, we are talking about the selection of a group not selected by the jury to design and build the monument. This is a dangerous decision both for PSPC and for government procurement in general. This question is related to the arts, and some people may be less concerned by this, but it is a major issue for us. First quick question, Ms. Daou. Mr. Fortin, how did you feel on June 19th when you were told, wonderful, the jury has selected you, you are the winner, but we're giving the contract to a different team? We were flabbergasted. As I said, it's in a 35-year career, I've never seen anything like it. We were disappointed and felt completely betrayed after that when we thought about it. Apologies. One moment.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président, je pense que les cloches sonnent. Je suis désolée d'interrompre le témoin. Je voulais simplement l'apporter à l'attention du Président.
C'est vrai, j'ai vu les lumières clignoter, donc je suis en train de voir, il y a un vote qui est demandé.
I'm going to pause for a moment to see what's going on. I believe that we have been called to vote.
I believe it's a quorum call, so we might be in the clear here.
Excuse me?
I believe it's a quorum call, so we might be okay.
Ah, okay, so now it's over.
It looks like.
No, that's okay, because we have to follow the rules in the House of Commons, so sorry. Madame Daou, vous aviez la parole, donc.
Ms. Daou, you had the floor. I had stopped the clock, so please carry on. So yes, I would say we were absolutely indignant that the highest authority in this country acted in this fashion. We are deeply concerned about the federal government's willingness to discredit a democratic process. It remains, though, that these are very important competitions. Mr. Pierre Paulus, this is public art, but that's not all that is at stake. Public art, architecture, and the process to award contracts. So this does, in fact, go beyond strictly the bounds of what would be solely public art. We are deeply concerned that the government should, how can I put it, cheat in this fashion, invalidate a public process. Thank you, Ms. Daou. A question for you, Mr. Chupin. You said in your comments that in your work you dealt with public services and Procurement Canada. When Ms. Daou said that the process was cheated, as it were, what, in your view, is the impact on that decision on Canada's procurement system? Well, without being overly dramatic, I wouldn't call it cheating, but it's certainly encroachment. It's interference, a well-established process that has been in place for a very long time. It's a well-established process. The result of that well-established process was essentially cancelled and replaced with something else. To my knowledge, there is no precedent. I've checked with colleagues internationally as well who got in touch with me and said, how can this be? A jury voted and a jury chose, and its decision was replaced by the results of a public vote. The impact on procurement is tremendous. For 5 or 6 years, I've been working with the Parliamentary Precinct and PSPC. I can't speak on their behalf, of course, but I can attest to the fact that there is concern, and I think this will absolutely perturb the way in which people perceive the rigor that must be maintained in awarding contracts. Thank you, Mr. Chupin. This morning, Louise Arbour, former Supreme Court Justice, said that this decision was an aberration and needed to be reversed to protect the integrity of public services and procurement. As a specialist, a legal expert in this, what is your view? Basically, I believe that ministers concerned, including and especially the Minister of Canadian Heritage, has poorly understood the role. In the second annex to the first call for tender, the Minister of Canadian Heritage's role is set out, and that definition, that description is therefore part of the contract documents and bound the minister at the end of the competition. Canadian Heritage will consider the decision, and as the minister responsible for commemorative memorials will be responsible for supporting the design that the jury has chosen. The minister's role was to essentially enshrine the jury's decision, and that is what normally happens in competitions I've been a part of, either because I was responsible for it or because I was on a jury. The person who runs the competition receives the jury's recommendation and conveys it to contracting authorities. Nothing else is done. There is no interference. There is no alteration of the jury's decision. The jury's decision by the person who organizes the competition is simply conveyed to those who will put it into place.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Excuse my French. I will have to ask my following questions in English. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to share with all of us that, this week is also Veterans Week, and this Saturday is Remembrance Day. So I'd like to take this opportunity to really share our tributes to all those who sacrifice and to serve our nations. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Team Daru. I understand the situation now is, at where it is. And maybe if you can share with us some insight with this committee, what leads your team to participate in this submission of the National Monument to Canada's Mission in Afghanistan contest?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. You said...
What leads you, your team, to participate in this time's contest?
You mean what type of work we have to do when we participate in that type of competition?
Well, basically, like, what makes you want to...
Oh, what makes us want to? Sorry. Okay, well, in this particular instance, what was quite interesting in terms of the competition was that, first of all, the topic itself. It's a very serious topic. It's the Canadian mission in Afghanistan, so to us that was a very, very interesting topic. Second of all, it's an important public commission, more than $3 million, let's say, for the artwork. And the location. It's an exceptional location, which is on Parliament Hill between Parliament and the War Museum. So to us, all of these elements were really, really interesting. So this is why we decided to participate. And the topic was so important that we as a team, because that was the interest of this competition, it's a multidisciplinary team that had to participate, meaning, of course, architects, landscape architect, the artist, Luca, and because the topic is so sensitive, this is why we went and we connected with Madame Arbour, because, of course, she understands the mission and so on. And we always want, whenever we do a competition, to make sure that we understand, kind of the history or the significance of these. These are civic gestures. They're important gestures, and they will last, for a lot of years to come. So we take this very, very seriously. And the site is exceptional. So we do think that as a team, we have a civic duty associated to that. So this is why we were so interested in participating in that competition.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I understand there was a change in location as well prior to having this as finalized for this purpose of the contest. And understanding the servicewomen and men that sacrifice in Afghanistan, this is the reason why we're doing this, to commemorate the work they have done for all Canadians here. And would you feel it's important to also include the opinions of our veterans who served in that mission, part of this design selection? Because reading through the requirements, there's not too much of the veteran voice in this selection process.
So just to refer to the competition, first of all, the site was a selected one. When we got the documents, the site was selected when we started the competition, right? In terms of the, we just want to connect with something, and it's very ultra clear in the documents. This monument is to celebrate the Canadian mission in Afghanistan, which was composed of veterans, of course, and of the civil society. This is what we really understood with Madame Arbour's participation, because it's not only the veterans, of course, it's the veterans and the civil society. And to respond to your question, because we did hear Madame Petitpas-Taylor talking about the veterans and so on, we just want to make sure that everybody understands what happened in terms of, at the beginning of this process, the veterans were consulted because they participated. There was, prior to the elaboration of the documents, the public and the veterans were consulted. It was built into the competition document. So when we received the documents, their opinion was already kind of integrated within these documents. So we want to make sure that everybody understands that. And it was very, very clear in all of the documents that we did receive. So their opinion was considered because they built that into the documents. First step. Second step, there was supposed to be a public hearing or a public consultation, which is usually the how they do with these type of monuments. We did participate on Le Breton Flats competition and so on, and there was a public consultation, which we always agree with, because there we get the opportunity to present our projects, to explain the subtleties, which we cannot explain, kind of when you just present a document or a video and so on. This did not happen. Mind you, it was in the rules of the competition. Instead, the government decided to do a survey. Of course, they got, kind of responses back. The survey was not dedicated solely to the veterans. The public, had the opportunity to answer. And the members of the jury did look at the result of that survey, and it was integrated in their conclusion when they selected us as the winning team.
Well, I guess I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Miao, Madame Daou.
Thank you, Mr. Miao and Ms. Daou. For the next 6 minutes, Mr. Luc Desilets. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to my colleagues and welcome to our witnesses. Your testimony is important to move this issue forward. My first question is to Mr. Chupin. You alluded to something I'd like you to elaborate on. Why was the competition structure set up the way that it is? Mr. Chairman, competitions exist because sometimes it is very difficult to judge and to truly grasp the complexity of situations when there's a historical competition, the symbolic weight on a monument or for the Florentine Duomo, for monuments or civic buildings. For example, there was a competition for Canada's Parliament buildings. In 19th century England, competitions were systematically put in place. So whenever there are a large array of issues, contradictory factors, because not only veterans are involved, all Canadians are involved in a way, then there's a budget issue, the site. So it's all very complex. And opinion surveys are simply not sufficient through a few likes here and there to fully take into account that complexity. Even during dictatorships, competitions were put in place so that things didn't get nasty. It's as if really the competition process was the best way of doing things. I apologize for interrupting you, Mr. Chupin. I don't have that much time. I read these words. Competitions, among other reasons, are put in place to avoid political interference. True or false? Oh, absolutely. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. A department or a prime minister's office chose to poke its nose in and basically invalidate a jury decision. Do you think this can damage Canada's reputation abroad? Well, it already is. I was contacted by colleagues through the national database that I was talking about, which is consulted by international colleagues. I published an opinion letter with a colleague who is an expert on public competitions. I published that when the decision was made because we were absolutely gutted. One country or more countries, a number of countries, democracies in general, are appalled. Thank you. In the 500 competitions that your catalogue comprises, has there been any instance where a government ignored a jury's decision and decided arbitrarily who the winner would be? Well, this situation where a jury's vote has been replaced with the results of public opinion, a public opinion survey, that has never happened, to my knowledge, in any country. Thank you. Out of 500 competitions in our data bank, not once. Mr. Lemoine, when you say that the government simply did not have the discretion, the right to award the contract to a different team, to a team other than Team Daou, what do you mean by that exactly? Could you please be specific? Well, the rules of the competition, which I read out, the departments concerned had the role of receiving the jury's recommendations and just making sure that a process was put in place to award them the contract. The other possibility is to cancel the competition. There is a clause saying that if the government feels that the competition or the result is no longer appropriate, then within the rules, the competition can be cancelled. That is possible, but simply granting or awarding the contract to a different team from the one selected by the jury, that is just not done in architecture or public art. In Canada, is there any case law, any jurisprudence, any precedents? Well, there are very few precedents or there's very little jurisprudence for public art. There is in calls for tender, but not in this. What are the legal consequences, in your view, of an arbitrary decision like the one the government made? There again, from the standpoint of architecture and public art, there is a consequence. Certainly, people will be discouraged from entering competitions in the future. People will be discouraged from sitting on juries because they'll wonder why they would work hard for a year when their decisions will be set aside. Will it be the best architects? Will it be the best designers? Will it be the best artists who put their names forward? Well, we don't have time to go through it all. You have sat or chaired 75 public art competitions. You said, Ms. Daou, and you've never seen a jury decision being overturned in this fashion. You've never seen that? No, never. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Thank you, Ms. Laure. Mr. Lemoine. To conclude the 6-minute round, I would invite Alexandre Boulris. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all. Thank you to our witnesses. Ms. Daou, Mr. Fortin, I'd like to begin by saying how unfortunate I find it that you have been treated in this unjust fashion by Canadian Heritage and the federal government. My apologies are useless because I was not involved, but I find it utterly deplorable on the part of a major country in democracy like Canada's. Mr. Lemoine, on Tout le monde en parle, this might be called the killer question. I'll go a little further than Mr. Desilets. You said that ministers did not have the power to overturn the jury's decisions, but they did. Is that illegal? Is what they did illegal? Sincerely, given that we have very little case law on this kind of issue because it was a public art competition, it is difficult for me to cite a tangible case. But standards and processes are important in democracy, and it's important for those that govern and those who are governed to follow the same set of rules, because in that way everyone knows what to expect. Here, very clearly, the rules changed. The rules of the game changed in mid-game, it seems, and I find it difficult to see how that could be done. Rerunning a competition, that's always a possibility, but in the current circumstances, I believe the most elegant solution for everyone would be to respect the jury's choice. Professor Chupin, a little earlier, you said that the jury's report must be published. It's very important, and you don't understand why it hasn't been released. Please tell us why releasing that report is important to you, to your view. It's like a court decision. You need to understand how it was reached. At the end of the process, everyone needs to understand why a jury who worked independently and who would normally have the discretion to choose a winner, because this is a public competition, Canadians need to be told why the decision was made. There is a report. There must be a report. We've tried to obtain it. We were told we would have it only in a few months or a year. But that document exists, and it explains precisely how the jury reached its qualitative decision on such a complex subject. We are seeing a lack of transparency for the whole process, which seems to have derailed ever since you received a letter on June 19th. I'm not familiar with these competitions, Mr. Fortin, but just for committee members to understand, what sort of investment in time, energy, and resources does it take to build a tender like this for a competition like this? It takes a great deal of energy, particularly for this one, because first of all, well, there are two stages. In the first stage, you have to qualify. The government received applications and chose 5. Out of those 5, all those 5 were asked to prepare a series of very comprehensive documents that included drawings, presentations, a great many components, and all that takes time, it takes energy, and it took about a year to prepare. After that, we needed to make a presentation. We made our presentation to the jury. Because of COVID, this was done virtually. And after that, the technical committee comes into play. Competitions like these are not only judged by a jury, there's also a technical proposal to be put forward. The technical committee asked us to be more specific about some of our proposals, so we had to redo that work and present it. It was a very significant effort. We were very interested in the project, but it took a great deal of energy for the whole team. Here you see only two of us, but we have a multidisciplinary team. There's an architect, landscape architecture, artists, advisors, and so on. We have experts. So it really is a significant amount of teamwork. And just to qualify, we need to present all the work we have done to that date. And it's very disappointing because it would have done a great deal for our careers. We did win the competition, so we want it for that reason. But we also don't want our peers to go through the same thing. We don't want people who are qualified and do quality work not to present their work to competitions. Would you be prepared to submit a proposal to a similar competition? If the government maintained its position, if it flouted its own rules, I would say no. It takes too much energy for the whole team. Moreover, we were told clearly that the competition results would be based on a survey, so no. Had we known that, we would never have taken part, because this is the kind of work, the kind of project where your submission needs to be assessed by experts. Thank you. We will now move to a second and last round of questions. Unfortunately, we will have two 4-minute questions and two 2.5-minute questions. Mr. Paulus. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the 4 minutes I have to close the loop, as it were. This is a public management scandal. This was done to a private company that can't find the government. You're the victim of a decision that is not your fault, and we have a responsibility to take this further. Our testimony clearly shows that the department shouldn't have made the decision it did. And the survey was completely taken apart by Léger Marketing, which showed it was absolutely worthless. I am a veteran myself. Something else I'd like to say: last week, I had before me Minister Saint-Onge, the Minister of Canadian Heritage, which rejected out of hand her own responsibility. I found that absolutely astounding. I hope she took some notes since then and has looked at the issue. And as a Quebecer, we're all Quebecers here, we have an issue with Minister Pablo Rodriguez, who was Canadian Minister, Heritage Minister at the time, who signed off on this. So he's involved too. Minister Saint-Onge seems to know nothing. And I would point out for the committee that this needs to be raised. It is a primary responsibility of a minister to know what's going on. Now, to the decision itself. The issue is clear. The rules of the competition were clearly not respected. Mr. Lemoine, you said in your reading of the rules of the competition that a minister cannot overturn the decision of a jury, but is responsible only for conveying it to those who will put it into practice. So this is very damaging to the process in Canada. We have to understand that Canadian heritage is all over the documents. But the fact that a minister, that the government would overturn a jury's decision, yes, that's the first paragraph of the document called Competition Requirements. It's in the introduction. It is understood that all finalist teams must know. It sets out everything teams need to know, the deadlines and all recommendations. it states that the contract will be awarded by the winning team, and it is clear that the winning team is to be selected by the jury, so there was no leeway there to set aside the decision. I have another question for you. Why was the other team really selected? Do you know? I'm asking Team Daou, but it can be any of the witnesses who answered. Do you have an idea, a real idea, of why the government chose the other team in such a cavalier fashion? No, and that is not the cause we're fighting against. What we're fighting for is an irregular procedures. There were rules underpinning this competition, and those were not respected. That is what we condemn. Have you heard anything that might indicate why the team that was chosen? Does somebody have a friend somewhere, perhaps? Right. Mr. Chairman, I have a few seconds left. I believe that this committee has done some work on this, but we need to go further. This is a very serious violation of procedure, and this must not be left unchallenged. Team Daou and those involved do not have the resources needed to fight the government. We have to do it. Thank you, Mr. Paulus. You had 30 seconds left, but I will ask Mr. May to continue.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all of the witnesses for being here with us today. And, as I want to, I believe it was Mr. Richards, when the ministers were here, who conveyed our hope that we can get this monument built as quickly as possible. And I think that this is what we are hearing from veterans across the country, that is the priority. That this has taken far too long. I want to, we had the minister here. The minister made it very clear, both ministers, that on this issue, she said that she was listening to veterans, and that was her top priority. I'm wondering through the chair if the folks from Daou can maybe convey what is your top priority with this project.
The top priority with this project is to respond to what was asked in the formalization of the monument, which was to commemorate the mission of Canada in Afghanistan, the Canadian mission in Afghanistan. So, if I may say so.
Continue, sorry.
So the idea is that we got rules, we got the documents which were describing them, we followed them, and as we're saying, the veterans' opinion is very, very important. It was provided through the documents because they were consulted prior to the redaction of these documents. So they were consulted prior to that. It's written in the documents. They were also consulted through a survey, and I would say that in the third instance, what we did is that we did connect with Madame Arbour to understand what everyone went through, meaning the civil society plus the veterans, and this is what we wanted to reflect in the monument that we conceptualized.
So the process is what is critical in this, not necessarily the sentiment of the veterans. Is the top priority, and I'm sorry, I'm short on time here, but I do think that is very critical to recognize that you had asked, you had mentioned earlier that you would not have participated if you knew that there was a survey. Did I hear you correctly in saying that?
No, you heard me wrong. No, you
then
didn't.
Can you maybe clarify that?
Yes, for sure.
What I heard was
in every competition,
one of the individuals, he said if there was a survey that you would not have maybe participated in this.
What I said, if the survey was to change the jury's decision or was to become the priority, we would not have participated because these are not the rules of the game. And let me answer your first question. The monument is called Monument commémoratif national de la mission du Canada en Afghanistan. This is what we had to respond to. There was a brief, which was well done. We responded to that, which included, of course, consultation amongst the veterans and so on. So
Okay,
this is
I'm sorry,
a whole.
but I have to
Yep.
move on quickly because I know I'm running short on time here, and I do have an important question here for Mr. Jean-Pierre Chupin. You had mentioned that in the entire world, there is not an example of this, and I'm wondering if you know about the process of the Holocaust Museum, the first process, the Holocaust Museum in Berlin. Are you familiar with that?
Est-ce que, Monsieur le Président, je vais répondre en français.
I'll answer in French. It's touchy to compare competitions because we would have to compare the rules that accompany them. There have been cancelled competitions, but there has never been a competition where the vote, the decision of the jury, was overturned.
That competition was originally changed, or they didn't award through the original process in Berlin, and what occurred there? Because I agree, it's not identical, but to make definitive statements to say that this kind of thing has never happened anywhere in the world,
Non.
I don't think is accurate.
Monsieur le Président, ce que j'ai dit.
Mr. Chairman, what I said is that we have to compare competition rules. Here there was no provision that would allow the government to withdraw in case or step in case of irregularity.
In Berlin,
Excuse me, Mr.
the
May.
members of that Jewish community came out very strongly against it.
Mr. May, sorry. Please, we have interpreters there, so
apologies.
please let Mr. Chupin respond to that, and you still have 20 seconds.
Thank you.
In that
If I
round.
can just wrap up and simply say that in that scenario in Berlin, there was a process, and the process resulted in a decision that was very, very much protested against by the Jewish community, and that process was halted and changed. And so for us to sit here and say that this kind of thing has never happened before and making these kinds of definitive statements, I think is incorrect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, Mr. Chupin, I can give Monsieur Chupin. Je peux vous donner 15 minutes pour 15 secondes pour.
I can give you 15 seconds to respond if you wish. I'll take the 15 minutes, Mr. Chairman. Truly, I did not say that there had been no case in which competitions were cancelled. Of course, competitions have been cancelled, and there have been controversies associated with decisions, as there are associated with votes and calls for tender. Thank you, Mr. Chupin. You may be able to pursue. Mr. Luc Desilets, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miot, I would like to add something to the question you put earlier. You said, how long would it take for a team like DAO to prepare? And they explained. But there were also 7 jury meetings, so about 300 hours used to move this forward. There was also a technical committee involved. And this involved not only DAO, but 9 other companies that were interested in the monument. So this is a tremendous, extraordinary waste of public funds. Mr. DAO, as you can imagine, I have a motion to discuss. May I read it? Please go ahead. That in accordance with Standing Order 1081, the committee asks the government to produce all emails, memos, and other documents without redacting them, all information exchanged between departments on the subject of commissioning the artwork involving either Canadian heritage and any other departments involved, as well as all memos and other written documents produced by Cabinet. This should all be submitted by November 17th, 2023. I would add that the chair of the committee should report to the House, and the committee should condemn the government's failure to respect the rules, as it did in deciding not to award the contract for the commemorative monument to Team Daou, to, in other words, the winners of the competition, who were declared the winners by a jury of experts put in place by the Liberal government. And as part of its study on the commemorative monument, the committee add a meeting and invite Mr. Pablo Rodriguez, former Canadian Heritage Minister, and Mr. Lawrence Macaulay, former Veterans Affairs Minister, to appear for an hour each in the week following our receiving the documents. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Is this a notice of motion? Thank you. I would also like to ask whether you have an English copy of this. Yes, it has been submitted. Yes, the clerk has just distributed the motion in view of our procedural rules. We are ready to discuss it. Mr. Richards? Would it be possible for Mr. Desilets to reread the motion? Mr. Desilets, could you please reread your motion? The interpreter points out that there is not yet, there is now a translation. That in accordance with Standing Order 1081, the committee asked the government to produce all emails, memos, and other documents unredacted, exchanged between the various departments involved in the selection of the artist and design teams for the National Memorial to Canada's mission in Afghanistan, namely the Department of Canadian Heritage and the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Prime Minister's Office and the Privy Council, and that all such documents be received by the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than November 17th, 2023. That the chair of the committee immediately report to the House that the committee denounces the government's about-face and lack of respect for the rules in deciding not to award the design of the commemorative monument to the team linking the artist Lucas Fortin and the architectural firm Daou Lestage Lizotte Stecker, which won the competition conducted by a team of experts set up by the Liberal government itself. And that, as part of its study of the commemorative monument, the committee add a meeting and invite Mr. Pablo Rodriguez, former Minister of Canadian Heritage, and Mr. Lawrence Macaulay, former Minister of Veterans Affairs, to testify for a minimum of 1 hour each within 1 week of receiving the documents. There have been a large number of steps. We've met ministers. We have no answers to our questions. There is a so-called survey on which decisions are being based. And there are a lot of gray areas and opacity on which we need to shed light. You have seen, as I have, that we're not getting any answers. So why don't we invite the ministers to explain the rationale, if rationale there is, underpinning their decisions. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. I have consulted our clerk and analyst. I would need consent from committee members to continue the debate on the motion you have just moved.
OK, merci. Donc, oui,
Thank you. Yes, we can continue the debate. And I see now Mr. Paulus, Mr. May, and Mr. Boulris who would like to speak. I know that this is a very interesting topic, but if I may, I'd like to apologize on behalf of members. Mr. Paulus. Thank you. This is a very important motion. I said so clearly. In fact, it's extremely important because we need to see why what has happened, and the DAO team does not have the resources. We have a responsibility here. This infringement of process is what I find most appalling. The government, in many issues over the past 8 years, but here once again, is showing a decision-making approach that runs counter to what governments should normally do. I therefore think it's important that we get to the bottom of things and have the documents required to do so. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Paulus.
And me.
Thank you. I actually have two questions, but I had something additional to say after we get the answers. First of all, how many more? I don't know if the clerk can answer this off the top of his head, but how many more meetings do we have until we rise for the Christmas break? Even approximation would be fine.
4 weeks total left.
4 weeks total, so
8 meetings.
8 meetings. And how many more meetings do we have left for the study, the current women's in military study?
About 8.
Right. So I mentioned this last time when this motion for this meeting came up. I would have liked to have seen us get to completion of the women's study to allow for the analysts to take advantage of the Christmas break. This is becoming mission creep, in my opinion, in terms of this study, and I think it disrespects the current study that we are engaged in. Also, Mr. Chair, I believe we have witnesses for that study now as well today? Okay. What I would ask is if we could dismiss the current witnesses and go directly to the study that we are engaged in. And I think, look, we have a responsibility on this committee to stay on mission, and I think we agreed to this study, women's study. If we want to continue to push that further and further down the line, that's the decision of this committee. My preference, and I would hope everyone's preference in this room, would that we get to the women's study, finish it, so that we can come back with strong recommendations in the new year for the government to solve some of those critical problems.
Thank you, Mr. May. And maintenant, je voudrais inviter Monsieur Boulris.
I'd like to invite Mr. Boulris now to take the floor. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that this is a motion that is most important for 2 reasons. The first reason is transparency. We need to have the documents. We need to be able to get to the bottom of things, to have the information. And all too often, we have departments that are not transparent enough. And I think that this motion covers this aspect. We're asking for transparency. And the second is the issue of ministerial responsibility, having the ministers who were there, who made the decisions, speak. Because if you have subsequent ministers say, oh, I wasn't there, I'm so sorry, I'm not aware, and that's the way they get out of it, I don't think that that's how we get the real accountability of ministerial responsibility. So for all these reasons, I really feel that people from all parties around this table have been able to speak, and for all these reasons, Mr. Chairman, and also because of the time of our witnesses, I'm asking for a vote. I'd like to call the question. All right, then we will move to a vote, but please allow me to let the... Yes, but...
exhaust the speakers list. Someone cannot.
Cannot. Okay.
Procedurally, you cannot.
All right. Okay. Please laissez-moi prendre le temps.
Please allow me to take the time to at least let our witnesses go because they may have other commitments. You have a lawyer, a professor who are here. So I want to thank them. If they want to remain, of course, they are free to do so. But otherwise, they may leave and then we'll proceed with our discussion. So, dear committee members, we had among us for this first hour, firstly, on a personal basis, Mr. François Lemoine, a lawyer. Please. Madame Francine Lord, advisor in public art, from the research chair for architecture competitions and mediation for excellence, Mr. Jean-Pierre Chupin, professor at the University of Montreal by video conference, and from Team Daou we had Madame Renée Daou, main associate architect and urbanism, and then we had Mr. Lucas Fortin, an artist and architect. So thank you to our witnesses. And since you mentioned in your speeches some documents, if you have documents to submit, please do so, and you can send them to our clerk, who will then hand them out to the members of the committee. So now I want to thank you, and we will continue with our debate. And I have Mr. Richards and Mr. Casey who want to speak. Mr. Richards.
A couple of things I wanted to just touch on real quickly. One of the things I wanted to discuss was very similar to what Mr. Boulay-Reese just had to say. So I won't spend a lot of time on it. But we heard a lot of statements today that I think it was clear to everybody that there was a lack of due process being followed here in this situation. But when I heard some statements today that were, I think, incredibly shocking to hear from some of the witnesses. I heard things like, and this is a direct quote, an exceptional lack of ethics by the government, that no artist is going to wish to take part in future competitions, that they've never seen outside experts disregarded, that it'll tarnish the government's credibility, that it undermines confidence in the government, that everything they've ever seen is that although competitions can be canceled, that generally the jury's decision is received and then conveyed to those who will put it in place. Talking about people being discouraged from entering future competitions, people being discouraged from being a part of juries. We had a witness say that Canadians need to be told why such a decision was made. Like, there were a lot of statements that I heard today that concerned me, and I think what Mr. Boulay-Reese just said was very accurate. For the idea that somehow, just because the government's changed ministers a few months ago, that somehow they can come in and say, well, we don't really know what happened, and they avoid accountability for. What we're hearing is a incredibly unusual, if not unprecedented, situation where a jury's decision was completely disregarded. Now, whatever one thinks about the monument that we will have is irrelevant. There is a need for people to follow a process and the government to follow a process, right? From that perspective, I think it is important that we do here, because the accountability does rest with ministers who were in place when the decisions were made, and so we need to follow that line. So I would have, had I not heard the kinds of things I'd heard today, I may have viewed this motion differently. But hearing those kinds of things and seeing what ministers sort of shrugging off accountability because they weren't there at the time the decisions were made tells us that is a pretty important thing for us to hear. And then there was this idea thrown out by one of the government members that this would somehow have us disregard our current study that we're doing, important study that we're doing on women veterans. Let's make it, we've got 9 meetings left. We've got 8 meetings left in our study with women veterans. Hopefully that means we can complete it by Christmas time. I mean, I know there are other things, or I don't know if there's supplementary estimates or anything like that that'll come or whatever, but I mean, there's a chance that other things do come in there. But even if that was to occur, and we're 1 or 2 meetings shy of being able to complete, we could give the instructions to the analysts to start to prepare a report based on everything we would have heard, which would be 95% of of the testimony we will hear. Finish the last couple meetings. The analysts can add in from those meetings, and we really wouldn't be delaying our ability to have a report at all from that perspective. I mean, we're going to hit Christmas. We are going to have a time where then for 6 or 7 weeks or whatever it is that we're away from here, the analyst can work on the report. He can do that either way. And either way, when we come back early in the time period after we come back from that break, we can review that report and have it completed. So it does not delay that report other than maybe a couple of days. So, given that we've given it such a thorough study, I think a couple of extra days to have a report finished certainly won't be the end of the world. And I think we can still do that the justice it absolutely deserves, but also ensure that we're doing this the justice that it deserves as well. If you have ministers coming in and saying, well, I wasn't there, so I'm not accountable, we need to hear from those that were then. So we'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Sean Casey to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last time this committee pushed back the women's study for something that was a political priority of one of our members or one of the parties here, we became the subject of an awful lot of angst in the veterans women's community and front page news for the lack of sensitivity exhibited by this committee in pushing back the women's study in favor of something else. I'm concerned of a repeat of that. When that happened, Mr. Desailly very wisely put an end to the debate on the motion out of respect for the witnesses. I therefore move that the debate on this motion now be adjourned.
J'ai besoin de consentement. Alors, j'ai entendu le mot une demande d'ajournement.
I have heard a motion to adjourn the debate, so that will be put to the vote.
My understanding is the speakers list was now exhausted, unless you've had someone added to it in the time that Mr. Casey was speaking. Therefore, we could have just had a vote on the actual motion, and so we can obviously choose to defeat his motion and then have the vote immediately. It looks to me like Mr. Casey's just trying to avoid accountability on part of the government.
Well, but first of all, like I said, I didn't hear anyone asking for a vote on that motion, but we just heard adjournment. No.
I have a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Just a second. Point of order.
The motion that I moved is not debatable and must go straight to a vote.
I know. So that's why I'm asking. Well, we have asking. So you're going to have to vote on that. It's up to you, member of the committee.
Just to be clear, now we'll have 2 votes rather than the one we could have had immediately to vote on the motion.
Yeah. Well. Okay, so I'm going to ask the clerk to take the vote, please. On the make sure that we say on the adjournment.
So yeah, the vote is on the adjournment of the debate on this motion. Ms. Bennett? Mr. Casey? Mr. May? Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sarai?
In favor.
Mr. Dowdell?
Opposed.
Mr. Fraser? Il est dans la pièce, c'est lui le membre.
Okay.
Well, he's the president, therefore he's the member president. He takes precedence. He's present in the room.
Non, 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 il va pas voter. Non, non.
Inaudible.
No.
Ms. Wagenthal.
No.
Monsieur Desilets.
Non.
Monsieur Bouliris.
Non.
Mr. Richards.
No.
That's 5 yeas, 6 nays.
Okay, so the motion is defeated, and I have as a question, Mr. Casey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The motion that we have before us proposes three things. The first is an order for production of documents. The second is that there be a report made to the House. And the third is an invitation to two other witnesses. With respect to the first paragraph, I believe that there should be something included there to ensure that we are not seeking things that are protected by cabinet confidentiality. With respect to the second paragraph, I believe it to be premature. In my view, we would be prejudging what's in the documents, and we would be prejudging the testimony of the ministers to immediately report to the House that we have reached a conclusion with respect to this matter. So I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion that the second paragraph of the motion be deleted.
Merci, Monsieur Casey. Bien alors.
Thank you. There is an amendment on the table for debate to delete the second paragraph of Mr. Desilets' motion. Who would like to take the floor on debate?
Donc, je ne vois.
Monsieur le Président, je
Oui.
peux
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is unacceptable. I understand this is a long motion, but look where we've got to. We need a solution to this kind of conflict, and it's not a difficult solution. The government needs to walk back its decision to award the contract somewhere else. I would keep the second paragraph.
Merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Seeing no other hands raised, we will move to a vote on Mr. Casey's amendment to the motion.
Ms. Bennett. Mr. Casey.
In favor?
Mr. May. Mr. Meow.
In favor.
Mr. Sarai.
In favor.
Mr. Dowdell.
Against.
Mr. Richards.
Against?
Mr. Tolmie.
Against.
Ms. Wagenthal.
Against.
Monsieur Desilets.
Contre.
Monsieur Bouliris.
Contre.
That's
It's understood that we were voting on the motion rather than the amendment, so I will change my vote.
okay. 5 yeas, 6 days.
L'amendement présenté par Monsieur Casey.
The amendment moved by Mr. Casey is defeated, so we will now come back to the main motion. Are there any other points of debate? The main motion is now put to the vote. Mr. Desilets' motion.
Bennett.
Against?
Mr. May.
Against.
Mr. Meow.
Against.
Mr. Sarai.
Against.
Mr. Dowdell.
In favor.
Mr. Richards.
In favor?
Mr. Tolmie.
In favor.
Ms. Wagenthal.
En favor.
Monsieur Desilets.
En faveur?
Monsieur Bouléris.
Pour.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Alors, je vous annonce que la motion présentée par M. Desilets a été adoptée et je voudrais demander, M. Desilets, afin de donner instruction.
Mr. Desilets' motion has passed. I don't have the motion in front of me, but is there a date in it? Yes, right. So, dear colleagues, it is 10 to 6. I would like to say that since we began this session at 4:24, we could continue until 6:24, and I want to ensure that the technical team can remain. We will take a break of no more than 5 minutes in order to welcome our second panel of witnesses. The meeting is suspended.
La séance.
We will resume.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Monday, October 3rd, 2022, the committee is resuming its study on the experience of women's veterans. Je peux informer les membres.
I can inform members that connection tests were successfully carried out. Since this is our study on the lived experiences of veterans, female veterans, we generally give a trigger warning, particularly in the presence of these witnesses. The experiences we discussed might have a negative effect on viewers, members, or staff. We are advising you of this. I would now like to welcome our witnesses.
From the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Mrs. Jennifer Ebert, Assistant Commissioner, Commanding Officer, B Division by video conference. Mrs. Diana Hale, Assistant Commissioner, Commanding Officer, G Division by video conference. And we have also with us here Mrs. Nadine Huggins, Chief Human Resources Officer, and Mrs. Joanne Regan, Executive Director, Executive Liaison Officer, National Compensation Services from Human Resources. Et je comprends que c'est Madame.
I understand that Ms. Nadine Huggins is going to be making the initial presentation on behalf of the RCMP.
It's for your opening statement, so Please go ahead.
Bonjour et merci.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. The Commissioner of the RCMP cannot be here today because of other commitments, but I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak to the committee on his behalf.
To acknowledge and thank all of those who have served and continue to serve in uniform. I am Nadine Huggins, and as the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for Human Resources at the RCMP since May the 1st of 2022, I'm keenly aware of the important and work our members perform, often at personal risk, while serving communities and keeping Canadians safe. Since 2020, I've been leading the development of our people management modernization efforts, along with the creation of our people strategy and Vision 150, Equity, Accountability, and Trust Action Plan, and most recently, the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Strategy for the RCMP. These programs are shifting mindsets, values, and behaviors in support of the Commissioner's commitment to modern, inclusive, and trusted RCMP. Je tiens à souligner respectueusement que comme je...
I would like to respectfully acknowledge that since I'm in Ottawa, I'm on the traditional and ceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. I recognize that we all work in different places, and therefore you may work in a different Indigenous territory.
Reflect and acknowledge the territory from which you are working. I really welcome the opportunity to speak with you about the experience of RCMP women's veterans, and I'd like to acknowledge the proud and trailblazing women, such as our Honourable and former Commissioner Beverly Busson, who testified earlier, our recently retired Brenda Lucky, as well as women who continue to serve today in the RCMP, like our commanding officers who are joining us today. First and foremost, transforming workplace culture is a priority for the RCMP, including instilling a healthy management culture. Our vision is for a healthy, inclusive, and trusted RCMP that our employees, stakeholders, partners, and communities we serve expect us to be and deserve us to be. Realizing this vision will ultimately enable the RCMP to achieve operational excellence. The RCMP has undertaken a number of initiatives that address women's unique experiences or concerns in the organization, as well as when they leave the uniform behind to pursue new challenges. These initiatives target specifically our kit, equipment and clothing, fitness assessments, and developing future leadership, which will aid in efforts to enhance the recruitment, retention, and the transition experience of women from our organization. These efforts have been guided by a body of knowledge about the factors that limit women's willingness to pursue a policing career, similar to that you would have heard from the armed forces, and the understanding that many of these factors result in unsatisfactory attrition and retention rates and poor discharge experiences. The RCMP recognizes that the barriers to attracting female candidates in policing, aside from the inherent risk of the job, is the culture. The RCMP is moving deliberately beyond the traditional recruitment response and looking to challenge our practices from an equity perspective. We understand that often the main barrier to engaging talent from diverse populations is the behavior of the organization itself, and the challenge is not to market better, but rather to increase the RCMP's capacity to be an employer of choice. Women and other equity-seeking groups moving within and out of RCMP and transitioning to civilian life can expect a member-centric, personalized, integrated services, and we intend to support their needs. To this end, we continue to work with our stakeholders to achieve this. The RCMP is building internal capacity to work in close collaboration with our Veterans Affairs to better position the organization and our retired members. We've implemented gender-based analysis plus throughout our policies and procedures, as well as in the decisions we take around kit, clothing, and other elements. The RCMP continues to make inroads as we move to ensure that we are an employer of choice, not just for our members in uniform, but all of our employees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Huggins, for your opening statement. And now we're going to have only one round of questions of 6 minutes each in order to finish around 6:30. So I'd like to invite Mr. Fraser Tolmie for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, thank you to our guests for being here today. In preparing for this meeting, we do a little bit of background information, and in this committee, we've heard a lot of valuable information about the experiences of female Canadian Armed Forces veterans. So I'm pleased to get the opportunity to speak with you today because the RCMP depot is in Regina, which just borders my riding, and I do have some close friends there, and I'm very excited to have you here. But I have to say, finding out information on the specific experiences of female RCMP members is not that simple. Even academic studies often noted that information on the experience of RCMP women veterans was simply not found. So I have to say, with this lack of research and information, one of the challenges we are facing when it comes to RCMP veterans is that there's just not a lot of information. And so to have you here today is important. Is that something that should go into our report about the lack of information that we have?
I think that so I will start, and then maybe I'll hand it over to Jen Ebert or to Deanna Hill to supplement. I think that there's always value in encouraging an evidence base for the work that any of our organizations do to ensure that we're being more equitable and inclusive. I think that whilst we are diligent in our practical approaches, having fundamental research in the area of women veterans can only be beneficial. Jennifer Ebert or Deanna Hill, would either of you like to supplement that answer?
I can speak on that. It's Jennifer Ebert. Thank you for having me, Chair. I think it's important to have an evidence-based approach and understanding of there are vast differences due to the geography and the type of work that RCMP officers do, especially female police officers. I myself have been in for 26 years, been in 6 provinces, 9 postings, all contract policing, and am a commanding officer, and so I have a very specific view, whereas my colleague Deanna Hill would have a different view, as well as other female officers across the country. And so I think it's incredibly important to have that evidence base, because my experience isn't necessarily others' experiences. I've obviously been quite successful as an assistant commissioner and a commanding officer for the past 6 years. I'll hand it over to Deanna, my colleague.
Okay, I appreciate that, and one of the things that I've noticed, Ms. Ebert, is that being in Moose Jaw, that it was Sylvie Barassa. Muzi was the depot commander, so we've seen a projection or female veterans being able to move up while they're on in the RCMP. One of the questions I have while I have your attention is that we've talked about equipment challenges for those that are in the CAF. Is that something that female veterans in the RCMP and serving police officers experience as well?
I will transfer it. Jen, did you want to start with that?
I can start with that, sure. There are certainly challenges specific to kit and clothing in relation to female police officers. It has changed a lot over the past several years in relation to using like GBA plus lens to the way that we fit our kit. There's been a lot of changes to the dress and deportment manual within the RCMP, reducing gender. allowing male, female, all genders of police officers to pick the kit that is best suited for them. I traditionally fit better into men's pants than I did into what was traditionally women's pants. And so it allows the fluidity, the way that we're handling kit and clothing now, to allow for that. Some of the, we're still working in relation to some of our kit and clothing in relation to making it more comfortable for all of our police officers, but there's certainly unique challenges with women in kit and clothing.
Okay, with those changes, is that because of physical trauma that is put in place because of wearing that equipment, or is it just like, you know, comfort and I mean, that can be, you know, an issue as well, but, you know, is there physical trauma that, you know, when someone's in the CAF, they're wearing, you know, a heavy 60-pound pack, it's a little bit different, but, you know, there's belts, there's guns, there's, you know, other things that the RCMP use. So is there anything that you could share with that?
I can speak from my experience in relation to that, and that's in relation to, as you refer to, the belts. So there has been changes in relation to the way that's done. Obviously, a gun belt's going to sit lower on the hip or on women, fit differently. And so there has been changes in our dress and apportment in relation to the type of gun belt we're using, as well as other changes that would allow overalls and those types of things. And women's body shapes and types, similar to men, they come in all shapes and sizes. However, from personal experience, you know, after having children, there's certain changes that happen to women's bodies that affect the way that they may fit into the uniform, as well as in relation to the modernization of our pistol and fitting smaller hands.
Chair, I didn't see the 1 minute flag there.
No. You are not looking at me. So it's over. So now you know that you can split your 6 minutes, and it will be really important also to choose the witness that you would like to answer the question. So now let's go to MP Bennett, Caroline Bennett, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And I would like to know who actually is in charge of the veterans. And that I hope, Mr. Chair, that we will hear from some women veterans from the RCMP, in that I think seeing that it's quite complicated in terms of how the RCMP veterans, but particularly women veterans, I think we know were excluded from the Veterans Wellbeing Act. And so how does that affect, and how do you compare the services that are available to RCMP veterans compared to the CAF veterans? And I think we heard last week that how people are treated while they're serving affects how they are treated as veterans, because if the questions on women's health were not asked while they were serving, then they end up having trouble dealing with that. And I guess I also would like to know, in terms of what is work-related accidents, how do you deal with people who it is a sexual trauma that clearly was work-related, not an accident, and how are you dealing with women who have left your employ traumatized, and what do you deal with that, and how does that differ? And I mean, I just think, you know, how many veterans file claims with VAC for sexual trauma?
Thank you for the question. Very much. We take the client-centered approach very seriously in the organization. So women who have any injuries of any kind are their needs are addressed quite substantially and substantively and immediately. I'm going to allow.
Just to be clear, isn't this now downloaded to provinces and territories?
The
in terms of their health care once they're a vet?
Well, yes, they are provinces and territories, but we work with Veterans Affairs to ensure that they receive the pensions that they are and the health care that they require, if there is any supplemental health care that they need. But I think it's probably great for Joanne to take this part because she's the subject matter expert on the actual implementation of veterans piece.
Thank you for the questions and the opportunity to answer. So certainly in terms of our still serving members, they do fall under the provincial health care, but the RCMP does have supplemental benefits and health care that go beyond what the provinces might need if it is occupational an injury or illness.
That includes sexual assault?
It would cover any kind of injury or illness as they work it through our occupational health and services process. So I would suggest that they would bring forward any injury or trauma or illness forward, and that would be dealt with along with the appropriate supports that would be required of our members. For those veterans, certainly the RCMP has a member injured on duty program.
But we're still looking at veterans' experience. Do you have feedback loops to feel whether they're getting the supports that they think they ought to? And do you have an advisory committee of women veterans to see whether they feel that their supports and services are adequate in terms of supplemental to the provincial and territorial systems?
So I'm pleased to tell you that we work with the RCMP Veterans Association, and that relationship is continuing to mature and develop. We are actively working towards a transition framework from members who are still serving and as they move into civilian life. We are also discussing what supports the veterans, women would need, as well as other veterans who are leaving the RCMP. So we are actively working with them to enhance those services and supports.
And in terms of mental health supports, perinatal mental health, I mean, I think that there's good evidence showing that women veterans have very different experiences while they're serving and then being accommodated for really what they experienced while they were serving when they become veterans. Do you have any recruitment retention numbers? Are women lasting in the service as long as the men?
So in terms of specific numbers, we'd be really pleased to provide you the latest data that we have on recruitment and retention writ large for the organization, including for women. We are seeing that we are maintaining our numbers, which is about 23% of our population are women, and they do tend to stay with the organization for about 20-25 years. Is that a little, which is a little shorter than for men, but there are a number, I think, of reasons for that. And we'll be happy to provide the committee with the numbers that we have. We'll send them off to the clerk if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Et maintenant, je voudrais inviter.
I would now like to invite Mr. Luc Desilets to take the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to what you were asking my Conservative colleagues. We were talking about veterans, military personnel who had repetitive injuries to their breasts. And is there something similar at the RCMP? No, I've never heard that. But I would like to ask my colleague Deanna Hill to talk more about that experience with our equipment.
Explore a bit her experience with our equipment, because we have not actually had a situation in the RCMP that I'm aware of where somebody had to modify their body to actually fit into our equipment.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. I certainly could not recall an instance personally that I've heard of over the past, and I am one of those people that will soon be a veteran. I have 34 years completed in the RCMP and may likely be on the other end of things in the not too distant future, and come from a time when our kit looked very, very different than it does today. There has been significant adjustments made in terms of uniformity. And instead of having female equipment versus male equipment and issued dress, that has all been adopted to where we can select pants or skirts and lots of things like that. The broader issue, I think, from my perspective, is when we look at what a police officer is meant to don on a daily basis in terms of the extensive amount of equipment. And one of the large problems comes into play when
Madame Hill, juste peut-être recentrer.
If I could just refocus my question, I'm talking about breast ablation removal. There were cases identified in the armed forces where there needed to be a breast resection or removal. You've never heard of this happening at the RCMP?
Breast removal in order to wear equipment specifically?
Right.
Yes, that is correct.
I have not heard of that whatsoever.
Donc, ce que vous êtes en train de me dire quelque part, c'est que.
So what you're saying, Ms. Hill, is that equipment at the RCMP is different from the equipment at the armed forces and is perhaps better adapted than armed forces equipment?
I couldn't speak to a comparison between what the military dons and what we wear on a daily basis.
OK. Une question.
A similar question. Ms. Hill, do you identify more musculoskeletal problems among women than among men at the RCMP?
Je pense que je vais prendre cette question.
I think I will take that question, if I may, Mr. Desilets, because the answer to your question is yes. We do see more muscle and bone problems with women. I believe my colleague Joanne has some data that she can share with you today. If you're interested in data that are particular to women, then we could, of course, provide the committee. Yes, thank you. One of the problems we have with the armed forces is the fact that equipment is not adapted. So I'm surprised that this does not create problems in the chest area in the RCMP. All the better if that's the case. Maternity leave for women at the RCMP, what does that look like? It's the same as the public service maternity leave, up to 5 years. Great. Have you observed any differences with birth? Are there any problems among children? There have been problems specific to the or among the children of military women. Is that the same thing at the RCMP? I don't know, because I don't know of any specific research. As Ms. Bennett was saying, do you have the impression that sexual assault complaints are processed differently at the RCMP than they are in the armed forces? I can't comment on the armed forces, but I can say that we take such complaints extremely seriously, and we are reviewing our complaints process to make sure that there is zero tolerance for sexual assault and discrimination. Another question on harassment complaints or complaints of sexual assault. Is there at the RCMP a directory to identify members who have committed sexual assault or sexual or have harassed people? Do you have a directory, a registry? No, but we take such conduct case by case, and it does remain in a person's file. But to say that I have a list or a directory in which I can conduct a search, no, there isn't. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
To invite, she's on video conference, Miss Rachel Blenny, for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that, and welcome to all of our witnesses today. I'm really excited about your testimony, and thank you so much for being here. So I'm just going to start by asking Ms. Huggins if you could answer, and then you can decide where the question should go if you're not the right person. You spoke a bit, of course, through the chair about the transformation of the workplace and specific initiatives that are being done for women, and that there's those efforts are based on a body of knowledge. And I'm just wondering, what are the specific initiatives, and what is the body of knowledge that is informing those initiatives?
Thanks very much for the question. So the organization is really quite focused on ensuring that we put all of our policies, our procedures through a gender-based analysis plus review. We've started that process with our kit and equipment. I think as Assistant Commissioner Ebert elaborated, things look very, very different than they did previously, and that is in part because of the gender-based analysis review that we did. The transformation for women in the organization has really fundamentally been about ensuring that we develop leaders from all genders, and that we ensure that those voices and that lived experience is brought to bear as part of our decision making in all areas. So when we talk about transformation in the RCMP and we talk about how it impacts women, it's taking into consideration the variety of recommendations and reviews that have been done on our organization and really taking them to heart and implementing them. In fact, just recently, the Commissioner has appointed a new senior ADM responsible for transformation in the organization, whose primary role will be to ensure that we implement all of the recommendations that are coming out of the variety of reviews that the organization has been party to.
Well, thank you for that. So I'm just wondering if you could share, if you know, how or whether the RCMP has implemented or is implementing any recommendations from the Bastarache report, Broken Lives, Broken Dreams, the final report on the implementation of the Merlot-Davidson Settlement Agreement.
Thank you for the question, and I can unequivocally say that we definitely are implementing the recommendations coming out of Bastarache, and we do publish on our public-facing website the progress that we're making as it pertains to the culture change that we've been driving at through Bastarache, and so we can certainly support the committee by providing the links to those reports to the clerk for your consideration.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so the second follow-up question on that, then is I know there's been some commentary that changing the culture from within can be a challenge and that there needs to be some support from external sources to change that culture. So I'm wondering, in the rolling out of addressing these recommendations, how is the work going in that area?
Thank you for the question. We are, in fact, quite engaged with our management advisory board as it pertains to any number of areas of change within the organization, including the culture change element. The board has been expanded over the last months, and in fact, heading off to meetings in Yellowknife with the board in the next couple of days to orient some new members and to continue the work that we've been doing, not only in terms of the implementation of the Ambassador Ash recommendations, but in terms of modernizing the organization writ large.
Well, thank you. And I hope I got this right, and please correct me if I didn't in your response. I understand that women RCMP officers are staying for a period of time. It seems pretty stable, but not as long as their male counterparts. I think I understood that. So just my question on that is, can you correct that if that's wrong? And can you explain what is the process of collecting data of serving RCMP officers that are women? So I'm really asking, like, how is women-focused information being gathered, and what measurements are being done around women staying in the forces and women's health outcomes throughout the period of time that they serve? One of the things we've heard from CAF veterans is if they don't have information documented on their service part, then when they get to their veteran section of their life, they're not getting the supports that they require because the documentation wasn't done well. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about what's happening there at the RCMP and how is that going?
Thanks very much for the question. I'll just sort of get us started, and then I'll hand it over to Joanne Rigon, who is the keeper of all the knowledge in this particular area. With regard to the collecting of data about women and their medical files, it is really important for us to have a fulsome file for our women members when they are in the service. And there is an increased a comfort, I think, with our women members coming forward if there are issues. There's not that tendency, because of the efforts that we're making around culture change. There isn't that effort to camouflage as much as that was the case before. So I'm optimistic that we're doing better than we used to. But perhaps Joanne can give us some updates on some numbers that will help to supplement that.
Thank you, Nadine, and thank you for the question. Certainly in the RCMP, our health records for both women and men serving are as comprehensive as they can be. We encourage our members to ensure that things are documented, certainly if they, and especially when they're injured or ill on duty. So that helps to facilitate any applications to Veterans Affairs Canada in that regard for compensation. And certainly in terms of, thank you.
Seconds? Yeah, you can complete your intervention.
And certainly in terms of ensuring that Veterans Affairs gets complete information in order to do any type of adjudication in that regard is also provided.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Blenny. And before I salute witnesses, like you said, you have some document like on recruitment, retention, other things. So do not hesitate to send everything to the clerk. But I have a special request from our analysts for the report. We would like to have a number of claims submitted by RCMP veterans to Veterans Affairs for sexual trauma. So we will be so pleased to receive those kind of information for our report. So, Mesdames, Messieurs, nous avions avec nous en deux.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the second hour, we welcomed RCMP representatives by video conference. We had Ms. Jennifer Eber, Division Commander, Division B, and Ms. Diana Hill, Deputy Commissioner, Commander of Division J. They appeared by video conference. With us is Ms. Nadine Higgins, Human Resources Director, and Joanne Rigaud, Executive Director, Executive Liaison Officer, and National Compensation Service Human Resources. So once again, thank you on behalf of all committee members, and on my own behalf, we thank you for having been with us today. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adjourn? I would take the opportunity to thank the technical team and all those who have been with us. The meeting is adjourned.